So Matthew, tell us about Git.
So each of us have a role, obviously, in this space, hence why we're both here talking about it. I am the author of the DZone Git Ref Card, an instructor for GitHub as of the last 6 months or so. And before that, teaching plenty of times, and then you helped a lot with...
That's right. Together we were co-presenters on the O'Reilly Git Masterclass.
McCullough
and Berglund on mastering Git. It was a great time.
It was Mugland and McCullough. It was an interesting blend. In fact, that's how it came out. But it was a lot of fun. It was kind of a real mixed-up kind of environment in the sense of you do, I do. Look what actually happens versus the monologue that typically is common with Git.
You're actually working through some exercises and repos with an audience and everything. It's a good deal.
So fun stuff. We have a lot of that under our belt. You've done some Git consulting. So let's start off with the easy question for the people out here. What Git, DVCS? Why? I'm pretty happy with Subversion. It's all right, you know.
Sure.
That's my attitude as a newcomer to the space.
Right.
Why would I choose it?
I'm kind of happy in the community. I feel like those reasons are being articulated more clearly now than say 3 or 4 years ago. There was this narrative out there that you don't need a centralized repo and everybody's got their own copy of everything, like it's some we don't need some oppressive central force on us anymore. I think it scared a lot of people.
Version of the control system.
That's really kind of. I think that scared a lot of people off, so it didn't make sense. But the benefits people are seeing now are cheap branching and merging that works well. It's easier to do in Subversion, and a good disconnected story. I mean, you and I travel a lot. We write code on airplanes, places where we're disconnected from the network. It's nice to be able to use the VCS when you're disconnected.
But you have to say at the same time that not that many people fly in airplanes as insanely much as we do. So is that the only value proposition? But in fact, I would consider it that's a implementation, a value that we get being on the airplanes. But in fact, the root of it is that the tool doesn't decide when you need to be on the network. It's the fact that you decide. So whether that is more frequent or whether that simply means you're carrying a laptop to the conference room versus another place, or you're working in a different place in your office, it's again your decision versus the tool enforcing it on you.
Right.
In fact, humorously, I have a friend who works at a Subversion company, and I said, I was having a little trouble with one of the slides comparing Subversion performance timing with Git, and he said, it's not really fair to compare the two. I said, you're right. So I'm not too good at Subversion. Can you remind me what option switch it is to turn off the network access when I do the git log or the git commit? He didn't find that too funny, and I did end up paying for lunch to kind of pay back for that offense. But the point is, the tool decides in Subversion.
Right.
In Git, you're more in control of the process, and I think that's what we're looking for as craftsmen and craftswomen in the space, is tools that facilitate what we want to do instead of dictate what we should do.
Telling us how to do it.
And that's a craftsman tool.
And there are some implications there that anybody who's not familiar with Git might not be seeing right away, which is that this disconnected mode means that everybody does have a complete copy of the repository. So when I'm operating on my repository, I'm committing changes or doing a diff back through history or recalling some old version of a file. I'm doing that with my local repository on my disk. No network access, which is a lot of the secret to the blazing performance, is all just local.
In fact, just in some cases, it's simplifying so many of the different facets. People look at it when we go through step by step how it was actually constructed, and I think there's a sense of, that's almost oversimplified, isn't it? But sometimes simple is good. We have over-engineered some of our tools to kind of just satisfy ourselves, thinking that it's necessary. Sometimes backing it off to just say, work against the local repo, and occasionally, as you see fit, send the changes to some other place. It seems like a simple thing, and sometimes simple works. In this case, I think that's what we're kind of returning back to as the roots of this. But it has a lot of ties to other topics here on the tour. Interestingly, key value stores, something you talked about in Cassandra.
Yes, and hash trees and all that kind of stuff. You see some common data structures between Git internally and the way some Dynamo class NoSQL stores exchange data between nodes. That's kind of cool.
I would in fact say that we are kind of reinvigorating the algorithm and data structure space as of late. It's not like it completely went dormant, but it kind of went sleepy or into hibernation a little bit for a little while. It felt like there was a period where we didn't reinvest a lot in that. And now we're digging up some older things that we knew about and reapplying them to new techniques and new places that they've never been applied to before.
Well, if we spent a decade thinking about ORMs and EJBs, it might have kind of given cover for some more interesting computer science themes to be dormant, and
motivates
now
transition.
We're motivated to take a second look at that stuff.
So do you use Git on most of your projects nowadays? Do you find that you use that as a version control system?
I do. Now I need to interact with a client who isn't using Git and isn't willing to,
There are those.
to migrate. You know, everybody's got problems they're dealing with right now, and sometimes migrating to a much better VCS just isn't on the menu yet. But you know, I'll drop back into subversion mode for that. But certainly anything of mine is Git hosted on GitHub, whether public or private. I mean, I wouldn't go back.
You said drop into subversion mode, but that actually is an interesting point. When you say that, it sounds like to the people listening that you mean go back to actually using subversion, but we wouldn't do that. In fact, we would use the bridge technology known as Givesvn to actually interact with the repository. You get most of the features of Git, not all of them, and you can do that with a subversion repository. Get the local commits, get the local history, get all the branches locally, and then at those occasional points, push the contents back to subversion using a binary compatible client that can send those using the subversion protocol, getting a revision number for those changes. So it's a nice intermediary step if you do not have the control to change over the central repo.
That's right.
So give yourself most of it.
A little bit of guerrilla warfare, you know, so you can introduce the technology you're eager to introduce, but still play well with, you know, whatever authorities have dictated has to be used.
Yep. And that's really a good tool. That's a very compatible tool. It's a very composed tool, saying, I understand you cannot just have a scorched earth approach or a greenfield approach to everything. So, hey, here's a transitionary approach that buys you 6 months, 3 months, a year, however long that is, to have an aim to eventually convert everything over, but I realize that's not possible for now.
Right. It's kind of funny, we've observed recently that Git has now been around long enough.
6 years.
6 years. That we're seeing legacy Git repos that need to be fixed. And you know, I've had some client engagements with people said, you know, this thing is broken and we need to know how to back out these pathological patterns we've employed in Git in the past and fix this repo. So that's interesting that we're there, but it really is still on a part of its adoption curve where we're just seeing crazy adoption. So
the interesting thing is the tools there. I'd like to hang something on top of what you just said. Unlike other version control systems where you have a limited vocabulary of administrative tools, Git almost feels balanced, and it scares me a little bit to say this, is balanced from the low-level administrative commands. You can use them if you want. You don't have to. It's rare that you need to. But when you do, you have precise access to do that manipulation that you just described. You're not employing binary manipulation and trickery to reformat the files. Oh, no. You're in fact using Git functions to perform that maintenance.
Yeah, that look like low-level, are low-level utilities. It's honestly kind of fun that you know, hacking, if you will, on a repository that's broken, that needs sort of non-standard things done to it, isn't really hacking, like you say. You don't have to go open files. You have
read a protocol format.
No. You have standard Git commands that are there and hidden from you most of the time that you can use for that. So you know, we have that kind of end of things of fixing what's been done badly. But most people, I think, are still interested in adopting Git. You know, you do training for GitHub. You help a lot of people get started in this. What would your advice be to somebody who either wants to advocate for Git adoption or is trying to plan it? What would you say to do that?
Well, I think I'd break it into two parts. One would be, what would be the top 3 reasons that you could think of that an organization should consider a different tool? I mean, maybe Subversion is working okay for the rest of your team, and this is many of the cases. So you need a catalyst to actually change this. What's the reason behind it? And I would say that we fear a lot of changes in version control. Point 1. So we react to that by checking in infrequently. 2, it imposes its will on us. So in fact, we craft our commits like Subversion would want us to, as opposed to how we would want as we're thinking during the course of the day.
Which any tool does, and that's.
But you want that to be as little as possible.
Oh, yes, you do. And you
all tools do it,
in a good
but
direction.
You want that to be as small as possible.
Right.
And 3, many teams have just started to think of Subversion working well as a backup tool. It's a backup in the cloud, if you will, that you just check in code and stuff, more stuff, end of days stuff, and you just send the code over there, and it doesn't really represent what you were doing.
They're not cohesive.
It's just a place to put the
work.
files so that everybody else can get them. Might as well be a Samba share that everybody can synchronize on with rsync.
Pretty much.
And what source code control was supposed to be, it's always supposed to have been this, but we've done better and better at facilitating it, is actually a journal or a history of what you were doing with the code. It's supposed to describe, oh, I was thinking about this, so I improved it, I refactored it, I changed the performance characteristics, I improved constants. Your commit history and the comments that go with it are supposed to describe that set of changes. Git facilitates making that happen, and it makes it lightweight enough that you want to do it, as opposed to feeling oppressed to do it.
Yeah, like you have to be told to do it and kind of work up the energy to branch. Never going to happen.
Now, do you find that you experiment more? When you said branch, that makes me think of one other thing. I found that it's reshaped for me, and I'm interested if you felt the same, that having this branching model and a namespace that includes your box, separate ones that you share with everybody else, 3, maybe the global GitHub or other centralized server. Do you find that with that terracing that you feel like you have kind of a playground that you can experiment, not be embarrassed by trying some crazy things out?
There's no question that's exactly how it works. I mean, and not to beat up subversion as as a whipping boy, but branching was an expensive activity then, and you had to be network connected, and it sort of felt like, wow, we should kind of put our pants on to do this, to go and make this happen. And branching in Git, quick, local, easy. I need an experimental approach to what I'm going to do in this little bit of JavaScript I'm doing in this page or something. Let me just go over here and do that, and I can quickly back out of it to work out well. So absolutely.
Well, Tim, I think that's a great introduction to Git. So I thank you for talking to me about it.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Good to be here.
So enjoyed it. Try Git.
Yes.